So the other day, I was watching an episode of Cowboy Bebop when I realized something. There's a scene in which the protagonist is walking towards a church while a melancholic track plays in the background. You can hear crows cawing in the ambience as the silhouette of the man walks towards the camera with a leisurely purpose. The scene is monochromatic, with shades of purple imbued within a dark, gritty, atmospheric texture. And then we cut to a shot of the camera tilting up, revealing the architecture of the church in all its perfect imperfections, but still within the purple haze of twilight. And this is when I realized that, damn, we don't see anime like this anymore. In fact, there was something about the aesthetic of anime from this specific era that is inexplicable. In its overall aesthetic, I can acknowledge that it is evergreen. A silly contrasting delineation arises upon bringing up this argument. And I call it being silly because it's not like anime in the modern day fails in the attraction department. By almost all metrics, the visuals we have now are vastly more all-encompassing than what it used to be. The colors are brighter, the motion is silkier, the character designs are diverse, and as an overall medium, there's a lot of room for stylistic choices. In other words, there is a level of perfection that we associate with modern animation. But perhaps it is this consumeristic perfection that forms the line of division between anime's past and present. And maybe that's why I feel the need to say that the beauty of vintage anime is a bit strange, because it's not something that makes sense from a technological perspective. There is something hidden deep inside the art itself that makes classic anime stand out from everything. I was watching Berserk a couple of days ago and I couldn't help but notice how distinct the animation was from anything that we have today. The imperfections in the art are laid bare in front of every viewer. You need not think twice to know it was hand-drawn. Every stroke of brush, every grain of texture, every blob of color, they're just so unique in the sense that someone could never replicate these landscapes, at least not a perfect recreation. It's practically impossible. For everything that you see here was drawn by the hand of an artist who deemed it interesting at the time to conceptualize a forest as merely shapes of colors. There's nothing here to latch onto, even if you want to replicate this. And when you compare this to a modern version of a forest, it looks nothing like it. This is one of my favorite shots from Your Name, and the forest here is visually stunning. It has all the qualities to evoke powerful emotions from the viewer. But notice how different these shots are from each other. With the latter, there is a lot of detail in the foreground all the way to the background. As the trees dissolve into the backdrop, there is still a level of detail that lets you understand what you're looking at. But here, there is a level of abstraction that makes you feel like you're looking at a piece of canvas. Someone took a brush and poured some paint over it, and by hand, they drew a bunch of shapes that resemble the silhouettes of trees. And the question here is not about which one looks more beautiful. That's irrelevant to the point, but it's about the uniqueness of a landscape such as this. This is undoubtedly the one that looks more polished and comprehensible, and in its completeness, more perfect. But this one right here, this is all about the imperfections of the art form. In Japanese culture, there is a term called Wabi-Sabi. It's quite a common yet inexplicable concept that is centered around imperfection. And people who believe in Wabi-Sabi can find beauty in flaws, irregularities, and asymmetry, pebbles covered in moss, grass growing on the roof, a broken ceramic pot. These are all imperfections that make these objects unique to the observer. And I feel like even from an artistic point of view, this concept was appreciated within hand-drawn anime. And when you take a look at the world building within these stories, there is a touch of organic imperfection that arises from the techniques implemented in the animation process. This incandescent street lamp from the 1985 sci-fi film called Angel's Egg, you can bet good money on the irreplicability of it. You might come across a lot of street lamps of varying colors and shapes, but nothing would ever look this artistically pleasing and irregular in its design. In some of the scenes from Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, there is a utilization of techniques like cross-hatching, where pencil shading often gives characters and objects a sense of texture, something that was a hallmark of the time. And these are stylistic choices to an extent, but it came from a need to be stylistically free. You had clear limitations at the time, so overlapping lines of pencil, partially enclosed shapes of objects, and even eraser marks were left out during production. And these are things that you simply won't find in modern anime. And in many ways, people would tell you that these errors or limitations in techniques, they sort of created a sense of personality to these scenes. Something that has slowly died off in overtly digitized animation. In vintage anime, the predominant mode of animation was carried out through these transparent acetate sheets, otherwise known as cells or cell animation. The artist would start by sketching on paper that would later be traced onto these transparent cells using ink. These cells would then be painted on, the artist manually mixing colors to attain the specific stylistic choice. The painted cells would then be stacked in layers, with the characters at the top, the effects in the midground, and the backgrounds at the bottom. And finally, a specialized camera would take photos of the layered cells, one frame at a time, to be stitched together to get the final product. But doing such a lengthy process relative to the more comfortable digital animation meant that there was a lot of room for errors. And I believe the existence of a wide range of errors and shortcomings are the secret ingredients, imperfections, the wabi-sabi of art that manifests as the evergreen charm within vintage anime. And these cells might have dust collected in between them, or possibly even scratches that translate to the final video. And on top of that, old anime were shot on physical film stock, which has this chemical layer containing light-sensitive silver halide crystals. And these crystals produce a natural grain, especially in low light sequences. In scenes of Akira and Ghost in the Shell, these film grains almost become part of the world building. The gritty nature of these sci-fi worlds only comes to life with those analog film grains. If you try to smooth it out using denoising or degraining techniques, you simply take away the lifeblood of these shots. And as you do that, it feels like you're watching a different film. And the same goes for the use of colors. You might have heard people say how vintage anime was visually a bit dark, how sometimes you can't see the details on the screen. And this is obviously not a problem concerning modern anime. The colors are indeed much brighter, and the details are not lost in the darker areas of the art. But stylistically, this is one of the most important features of what gives vintage anime that distinct beauty: the contrast. Contrast can be referred to as the difference in brightness and colors between the different parts of an image. When you say an image has high contrast, it means that the darker parts tend to be more blacker and the lighter tones tend to be more whiter. In other words, darker shadows and brighter highlights. And in case you haven't noticed, this is another important feature that separates vintage anime from the modern ones. Whether you're watching Evangelion or Cowboy Bebop or Perfect Blue, the shadows you see are always intense. And more than just a stylistic choice, it actually came out of technical limitations. You see, shadows are not necessarily always black. It is much more nuanced, and depending on the source of the light, it changes in color and intensity. But in classical methods of animation, shadows were painted directly onto the same cell as the character using solid, opaque colors. These shadows were not semi-transparent like in modern digital layers. They were flat and fully saturated. In modern anime, animators have digital softwares that allows opacity control and smoother gradients that makes it easier to create realistic shadows. But back in the day, they had no such tools. Shadows had to be hand-cut and hand-painted, and the result of that would always look like this. But the thing is, it slowly turned into an aesthetic. Notice how these two similar-looking scenes looks completely different from an aesthetic point of view. The modern version of this scene is undeniably beautiful. The warm glow of the setting sun diffusing into the ambience, creating a golden environment that looks almost ethereal. But switching back to the original, it feels more harsh and rigid. And although I love this almost surrealistic frame, the original is more narratively on point with the story. It almost feels like an apocalyptic glow, not something that's surreal and warming, but something that would be symbolic of Shinji's chaotic mind. And I believe it is the contrast that gives it that feeling. And sticking with a similar characteristic, I always found the use of colors to be very intriguing in vintage anime. It is no surprise that animation in those days wasn't as colorful as it is today. If you want to be specific about colors, be captured by the sheer enormity of the color palettes for every style and occasion, you'd want to pick a modern anime. I mean, a scene from an anime like Your Name has a stunning range of color palettes just for the sky alone. It's a visual treat, no doubt about it, but if you want something that's more modest, times when you literally had to come up with colors to tell your story, you gotta watch something like Akira. And I think people don't realize this enough, but the colors of Akira to this day defines the cyberpunk genre. And even in the scenes from Evangelion or Cowboy Bebop, monochromatic color schemes dominate the landscapes, not just as a cool gimmick, but as a way of storytelling, something that you don't see enough these days. Just in Cowboy Bebop alone, you will find so many shots and frames where the colors are almost washed out and subdued, just to fit in line with this neo-noir gritty storytelling. And in fact, when they portray the brighter colors, it is often symbolic of something, case in point being the desaturated rose that turns bright red at the very beginning of the series, representing Spike's enduring affection to his lost love, Julia. The dream sequences and the scenes from the hospital ward in Evangelion are very surrealistic in the sense they use monochromatic color schemes to drown out the individual colors. It's almost like everything is washed out by a shade of blue or green or orange, depending on the type and the intensity of the dreamlike scenarios. But the visuals were not the only thing that made vintage anime stand out. It was also the quality of the storytelling. You see, it's often said that art is a reflection of society. If you were to go back in time to almost any time period in our history, there would be a corresponding style of art, whether it be painters or sculptors or musicians, portraying the societal landscape through their works. Starting from the Renaissance art that reflected upon humanism, scientific inquiry, and a rejection in blind belief systems, to the Romanticist idea of embracing nature and the sublime in the face of rapid industrialization. Art offers a canvas for the society to express their problems and ideas and achievements as a time capsule for the future generations. And this is still the case with films, or for the purpose of this video, animation. In the post-World War era, Japan went through this reindustrialization phase when technology and industries provided a sense of hope for economic stability and prosperity. But this advancing technology was considered by artists as a double-edged sword. And this was the mindset that created stories like Astro Boy. But as Japan's economy grew at a rapid rate, artists would explore themes of escapism and adventure, sometimes even calling out giant conglomerates for exercising power and control over people. But when Japan reached the 80s, they were staring at a massive asset bubble. And as a result of that, the spending power grew exponentially, creating soaring wealth and lavish spending practices that ballooned Japan's economy as one of the biggest in the world. But while all of this was happening, there was a lot of money flowing into the anime industry as well. And this was a goldmine for the artists to explore topics and ideas that could not be explored before. And artists being artists, they found the perfect balance between celebrations and concerns regarding the economy. And that is why a lot of the anime from this time focused on real-life problems. With technology and innovation at the forefront, sometimes the animators would showcase the fun and the luxuries of the world around them, and then they would switch it to the other side, where things like pollution and environmentalism, dystopian landscapes and poverty, post-apocalyptic concepts, these would serve as a premonition to what would happen later on. Because this cautionary style of storytelling did come to pass in 1991 when the bubble economy finally burst. And the post-bubble economy saw a period of prolonged economic stagnation, rising unemployment, and shifting social values. Now referred to as the lost decade, the animation in this time period was reflective of the economic state of the society. And the point that I'm trying to make through this is the fact that there was a period in time from the 80s through to the late 90s when animators would become deeply philosophical in their approach to storytelling, mirroring the realism around them. dystopian worlds, and post-apocalyptic settings dominated anime, it was not a coincidence, it was a reflection of the world around them. From Evangelion's existential anxiety to serial Experiments Lane's exploration of digital seclusion, worries about privacy and the internet in Perfect Blue, to blurring lines between humans and technology in Ghost in the Shell, these weren't just fantastical stories, no. These were a group of artists holding a mirror to the real world, and that is something that you simply don't get in modern anime. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that philosophy is an unfamiliar concept in modern animation, but it is no surprise that in a world that has less unknown variables as it did in the 90s, realistically, there is no scope for such stories to be relatable to people. And once again, the case in point being the shift in the genres of popular anime as well. While the 90s were filled with concerns regarding technology and existential dread, today there is more focus on escapist fantasies. Therefore, the standards have shifted more towards isekai and adventure and power fantasies. And on top of that, studios are now looking for a rather formulaic approach to animation, where clearly there is a global audience to appeal to. There is no time for experimentation or taking risks over certain tested and proven methods that would ensure commercial success. So, in other words, you simply don't get art that is creator-driven. Evangelion is relatable because Hideaki Anno was putting a piece of his depression into the actual storytelling. It meant more to the audience because it was emotionally vulnerable. Beyond the aesthetic, the storytelling was a form of artistic catharsis. Mamoru Oshii, the director of both Ghost in the Shell and Angel's Egg, was a man questioning the nature of faith and life itself through his works. His anime made you feel disoriented, but also more aware. It makes you reflect on your place in the real world and whether the world itself can be trusted at all. The complexity of the narratives meant that the anime would be slow-paced, with those infamous lagging frames that would last on your screen for a couple of extra seconds. It didn't try to shy away from potentially compromising viewer engagement for a slow-paced philosophical moment, and that right there is true creative control. Just watching a single scene from Cowboy Bebop would make you feel like you're watching an extension of a real, tangible world. Although classified as this weird genre blend called space western, there are aspects of it that feel incredibly relatable from a human point of view. In line with the affairs of the world around them, the animators created a world that is fundamentally nihilistic. But despite the level of emotional endurance the characters exhibit in the storytelling, the narrative zones in on a tragic conclusion. It doesn't have a happy ending. Much like most of the other anime from this era, it is cathartic for sure, but happy? Not really. It is the cautionary tale that makes the average person think about their life. And I guess it makes sense that these kinds of stories slowly faded away into extinction with the consumerist approach that studios decided to take. I don't think a film like Akira, the highest budget for any anime at the time, could be made in this day and age. If you're spending money, you would want to spend that on less risky, non-experimental, proven stories. And I guess it didn't also help the artists that anime became a global sensation over time. You weren't just making art for a small audience anymore, which meant that studios had to step in to make decisions that took away creative control from individual artists. And the art that you see is a reflection of this globalist economy. But before someone says that modern anime is crap, I just want to say no. It has simply evolved with the times. Both artistically and narratively, the world has changed. Now you have digital techniques of anime creation that are significantly faster and less resource-driven to that of traditional animation. The world has moved on from collectively wondering about the future and their place in it to needing to take a break from the stress of the mechanized lifestyles people live. They're more in need of living in the now to long for escapism rather than a self-reflection on the state of affairs of the world that they live in. But that's why vintage anime is so unique, and like I explained, its beauty is so everlasting. The golden era was so distinct on the animation timeline, a time of artistic risk-taking shaped by the economic uncertainty and creative freedom, something that's much harder to replicate in the modern world. And that's why you don't get to see anime like this anymore. And that's why we hold these stories so deeply to our hearts.